When the convoys stopped arriving and the warehouses stood empty, Britain turned to an ancient knowledge nearly lost to industrialization. The countryside, once merely scenic, transformed into a lifeline as families learned what their grandmothers had known, that England itself was an edible landscape waiting to sustain those who understood its secrets. As German U-boats prowled the Atlantic and shipping routes collapsed, reducing food imports by more than half, the Ministry of Food distributed pamphlets with illustrations of nettles, dandelions, and wild berries. What had been weeds became vegetables. What had been ignored became essential. The transformation happened street by street, village by village, as urban dwellers rediscovered skills their rural ancestors had practiced without thought. Across the patchwork fields and along the ancient hedgerows, women and children filled baskets with stinging nettles, their hands protected by worn gloves as they harvested what would become that evening's soup. The nettles boiled down tasted remarkably like spinach and provided iron that rationed meat could no longer supply. In autumn, rosehips hung like crimson jewels from wild roses, and gathering parties transformed these vitamin-rich fruits into syrup that prevented scurvy in children, when citrus shipments vanished. The government actually organized collection programs, paying children by the pound for rosehips that would be processed into supplements more potent than orange juice. These expeditions became social events, moments of community solidarity, where the act of gathering food from the wild became both practical necessity and patriotic duty. The oak forests that had built Britain's naval supremacy now fed her people in ways not seen since medieval times. Housewives learned to leach the bitter tannins from acorns through repeated boiling and soaking, transforming them into flour that could extend precious wheat rations. The process was labor-intensive, requiring patience and multiple water changes, but it worked. Sweet chestnuts, roasted over coal fires, became a staple carbohydrate when bread was scarce, their meaty texture and subtle sweetness offering satisfaction that ration coupons could no longer guarantee. Even the beech trees offered mast that, when properly prepared, could be ground and roasted into a coffee substitute that, while nothing like the real thing, provided warmth and ritual when actual coffee beans were reserved for troops overseas. Dandelion roots, dug from gardens and roadside verges, were similarly roasted and ground. The resulting brew was bitter and earthy, but it was hot, it was free, and it represented defiance, a refusal to surrender comfort entirely to the hardships of war. Every cup of dandelion coffee was a small victory over scarcity, proof that adaptability could bridge the gap between what was lost and what could be improvised. Women exchanged recipes and techniques over garden fences, building networks of knowledge that kept families fed when conventional supply chains failed. Far from Britain's organized foraging programs in the deep woodlands of Poland and Belarus, survival meant something far more desperate. Jewish families fleeing the ghettos found refuge in forests so dense that entire communities could disappear beneath the canopy. Here, foraging wasn't supplemental. It was the difference between life and death. They gathered mushrooms with knowledge passed down through generations, distinguishing the edible from the deadly when a single mistake meant fatal poisoning. Wild berries sustained them through summer months, while winter brought the grinding challenge of finding anything at all beneath the snow. These forest dwellers learned to read the land with intensity born of necessity, understanding which bark could be chewed for sustenance and which roots could be safely consumed raw. These forest refugees faced challenges British civilians could scarcely imagine. They hunted when possible, foraged constantly and endured hunger that weakened bodies already traumatized by displacement, yet they persisted, applying traditional knowledge to circumstances no tradition had prepared them for, writing a chapter of survival that history has only recently begun to fully acknowledge. The edible forest of World War II teaches us that nature provides for those who learn her language, but also that knowledge without preparation means suffering. Subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles to explore more forgotten survival wisdom, and share this with anyone who understands that self-reliance begins with remembering what our ancestors knew.